welcome to our CARE community briefing on your voting rights. Thank you for joining us. My name is Kat New, and I am the Director for the Office of Community Awareness, Response, and Engagement, or CARE, here at the California Department of Justice. Please note that closed captioning is also available. It can be accessed under the More tab in the menu button on your screen. I will now turn it over to my co-host, Mahin Ahmed.
Hi, everyone. My name is Mahin Ahmed. I'm the Deputy Director for the Office of CARE. As Election Day gets closer, many Californians have questions about their voting rights and concerns about their safety. In response to these questions and concerns, our team at the California Department of Justice published new resource materials. In today's presentation, you'll learn about these resources and how they may be of benefit to you. First, you'll hear from the California DOJ on what we do to enforce California's election laws in an effort to protect all California voters. Afterward, the Secretary of State will share information about their responsibilities in administering elections in California. And to round out the presentations, we are pleased to present a panel of trusted community and nonprofit organization leaders who will provide information on resources that they've developed to help voters like you understand your rights. This panel will be moderated by our Office of CARE Community Outreach Manager, Laura Tenejero.
After the presentation, we will have time for question and answers. Throughout the presentation, please share your questions in the Q&A box on your screen so that we can collect them and answer them after the presentation. If you have a question for a specific presenter, please specify that in your question. Lastly, if you are joining us today as a reporter or are affiliated with the press, please direct your questions to agpressoffice@doj.ca.gov. It is now my pleasure to introduce Special Assistant Attorneys General Eleanor Bloom and Damon Brown, who will share information on our new voter resources. Presenting first will be Damon Brown. Welcome, Damon.
Thank you, Kat, and it's great to be here this morning with everyone to talk a little bit about the Attorney General's role in enforcing the laws, California's election laws, and the responsibility of our office in this very important part of our protecting our democracy. I'm going to share a few resources that we've recently done and also talk a little bit about the ways in which the DOJ enforces and protects the rights to vote for all Californians. If you can go to the next slide, please. And so our voting rights work is encapsulated here in very broad buckets. The title and summary responsibilities for the ballot that our office holds, the enforcement mechanisms that we have to enforce election laws, our legislative role in supporting legislation to expand and protect the right to vote, utilizing amicus briefs and multi-state letters to urge other jurisdictions to take actions to protect the right to vote, supporting our Secretary of State in their efforts to discharge the duties of their office, and then providing guidance to the public as well as legal alerts to law enforcement and other stakeholders to make sure that everyone has as much information as possible to carry out their own roles under the law as it relates to voting rights. Next slide, please. And so as it relates to the title and summary roles of our office, this is our ballot initiative process. It begins with our initiative process where any California stakeholders can place a ballot initiative, an initiative on the ballot once they meet the requisite requirements for that, and to propose different laws or even constitutional amendments that are not put forth by the governor or the legislature. And our responsibility in our office is to prepare the title and summary that you see on your ballots and in your ballot information that describes the measure and that's circulated prior to your opportunity to then vote on those laws. The state, when we prepare the title and summary, it goes to the Secretary of State's office, and that's when you see the information that you would likely get in the mail that describes all of the various initiatives. Because of our role here, we don't take any positions on ballot measures because of our title and summary responsibility. So, for example, if you see constitutional amendments that are on the ballot, those the Attorney General would not take a substantive position in support of or in opposition to any of those measures. Next slide, please. Another way in which we promote voting rights is through enforcement. And so that can look a few different ways. One, we initiate lawsuits where we find bad actors who are breaking the law as it relates to elections and voting rights. We also conduct investigations where we have evidence that the laws are being violated. And we also issue correspondence and engage with local agencies when we, again, learn of potential violations or concerns that are expressed to us through stakeholders and community members. On this slide, I've just listed a couple of lawsuits that we have currently pending. One is a lawsuit that was filed against the city of Huntington Beach, where the Attorney General and the Secretary of State have sued that city, challenging a voter ID local charter amendment that would require the presentation of ID at the time an individual was attempting to cast a vote. Our position has been the state law preempts any local voter ID requirement because there's already a process by which voters must identify themselves prior to being qualified to cast their vote. And so there's a new law that has been enacted, SB 1174, which supports this same idea of not allowing local governments, whether charter or general law, to enact their own voter ID requirements. The second lawsuit that's listed is one where the County of Fresno passed an initiative called Measure A, which amended their county charter to change their elections for DA and sheriff from the presidential cycle. That violates AB 759, which was signed into law in September of 2022, that declares that elections to select DAs and sheriff must be held in the year of the presidential primary. Investigations, we have a Butte County Fair Maps Act investigation, which is a redistricting investigation after Butte County engaged in its redistricting in this last cycle, and the LA City Council redistricting investigation, where there were allegations of improprieties that took place during its redistricting. Those are ongoing investigations that our office is conducting. And finally, there were some issues in Shasta County that were public concerning hand counts and other access to voting for disabled persons that we engaged with the city on once we became aware of those concerns. Next slide, please. We also sponsor legislation. We have our Office of Legislative Affairs, and their role is to move our package of sponsored and support bills and to provide technical assistance to authors' offices on bills that may have an impact in the work that we're doing. This is an example of two bills that Attorney General Bonta sponsored last year and this year that relate to voting. One is an amendment to the Fair Maps Act, and the other has to do with deceptive practices prior to the election. Next slide. As I also mentioned, amicus briefs are friend of the court briefs that we file in other jurisdictions where issues that have impact a state interest arise, where California's voice should be heard in support of those who may be defending laws or in opposition to laws that would narrow the ability of individuals to exercise their rights. And here is a list of some recent cases where we have weighed in support of laws that either were attempting to disenfranchise voters or to limit absentee or vote by mail efforts by states. We also took positions affirming rulings where maps were found to have violated the Voting Rights Act. These are all public briefs that can be found on our website. Next slide. In this same way, we will issue multi-state letters, which are letters where other attorneys generals join us to support private actors who may be engaged in activities that we would like to encourage, or to petition the federal government in their rulemaking process to make changes to or in support of proposed changes to rules. And here's a list of 3 different letters that we have sent recently, including a letter to the Department of Justice calling for an investigation into alleged voter intimidation of Latino voters in Texas that was in the news recently that you may have been aware of. Next slide. We also support the Secretary of State, who you'll hear from shortly. In their role, we will defend and partner with them in legal actions. We also provide on-call assistance to them on Election Day, and they will share with you information on when they become aware of potential violations, when we can support their efforts to make sure that everyone's right to vote is upheld throughout the state on Election Day. Next slide. This is a list of various guidance that we've recently put out. Law enforcement bulletin that we just issued, which is for law enforcement to remind them of their obligations on protecting California voters from election interference, voter intimidation, and deception. For example, it is a felony to coerce or intimidate a person to vote, not to vote, or to vote in a certain way, or to fraudulently advertise, advise someone that they are not eligible to vote when in fact they are. And so this guide assists law enforcement with carrying out those duties. We also issued a guide for disability rights to make sure that federal and state laws that provide different ways for voters with disabilities to access the right to vote through accessible voting machines at polling locations, access to registration materials in alternative formats, and allowing voters to use remote accessible vote by mail system. This guide is published so that folks who need this information are able to know what their rights are and to contact the various authorities to pursue their right to vote. This last slide, this last point relates to a consumer alert that we also put out regarding the spread of election misinformation through deepfakes and AI. And to talk more about that work in the consumer space, I'd like to bring on my colleague, Eleanor Bloom, to share information on that point.
Great. Thank you, Damon, and thank you all for joining us here today. As Damon described, California state law prohibits interference with voting rights, and that set of protections for voters makes it a crime to intentionally mislead voters about their eligibility to vote or about where and when to vote. It also prohibits using coercion or intimidation to get a person to vote or to refrain from voting, or to vote or refrain from voting for any particular person or measure. These protections apply not only in the more typical bread and butter incumbent ways that we have thought of voter intimidation in the past, but also to the generation of materials and dissemination of materials through artificial intelligence, social media platforms, and other forms of technology. We have seen in the 2020 general election, as well as in 2022, a dramatic increase in the spread of false and misleading claims on social media platforms, particularly about where, when, and how to vote. And we expect that this trend will continue as we move into the general election that is underway. Voting is underway right now. So with that, the California Department of Justice, standing alongside the Secretary of State's office a couple of weeks ago, issued 2 really important documents. One is a consumer alert. that describes that describes for consumers their protections under California state law. We'll make sure that you have a link to that. I believe that'll be provided here at the end. And it provides consumers with the basic outlines of the elections code here in California that prohibit interference with voting rights, particularly on misinformation about where and when to vote or about eligibility to vote. And the second is an information bulletin to all law enforcement agencies here in the state that provides a guide for law enforcement offices about those same laws that prohibit intentionally misleading statements about voter eligibility and the time, place, and manner of voting. And this is really important as we move into an election season where we expect to see a spread of misinformation using tools beyond those which we may be more accustomed to dealing with prior to the 2020 general election. For more resources on those, I urge everyone to take a look carefully at the consumer alert as well as that law enforcement bulletin that has specific citations to the laws that protect California voters from this false and misleading information through whatever mechanisms it may be generated or disseminated. I'm going to turn it now to Steve Reyes, the Chief Counsel, and Jana Lean, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, Chief of Elections, to present on behalf of the Secretary of State, which has been our partner in a great deal of this work. So with that, I'd like to introduce our next speakers, and I will be dropping off camera.
All right. Let me see. I don't see the slideshow. There we go. Good morning, everybody. I want to thank the Attorney General's Office for inviting us here today. We're really pleased to have them as such great partners in all the work that we do to protect our elections and to protect voting rights. So a few things. I'm here with my election chief of elections, Jana Lean, as she mentioned. So we'll get on a presentation here to really discuss things that many of your organizations will likely be involved on as you prepare for elections, and you may, as a result of the work you do during this election cycle, be getting a lot of questions. So today, the presentation is more about talking, about the perfect place for this, to start is the Voter Bill of Rights. These are the types of questions that we all have here. Whoops, there we go. Let me turn this back. This document will outline the 10 basic rights all voters have in California. In this document. And this was established by statute, so I won't get into too much of the history here. But as you are engaging with your constituencies, whether they be folks who are underserved communities or just generally getting out the vote, getting out the vote, encouraging people to still register, all of these things will be addressed here. I mean, this is kind of the go-to document for making sure that you have all the answers to some of the questions, many of the questions your constituencies will have. So as I mentioned, these are the 10 basic rights all voters have in California. One of the things here, let me just move my little image out of here. So this Voter Bill of Rights, where is it? It's a big document, as you can see, just a single page here, but pretty dense. You'll find it on the Secretary of State's website at the link above. You'll also find it in the official voter information guide on page 2 in particular, and it's in 10 languages and in audio versions as well. This Voter Bill of Rights will be on the second page as well. And where will you find the voter information guide itself? So that guide is on the website. You'll see right there, voterguide.sos.ca.gov. There's a mobile-friendly version of it you can access through the QR code right there. And you'll also find it in your mailbox. This Voter Bill of Rights is kind of a thick document. So you will, every household who has a registered voter with registered voters will receive this voter information guide. Again, page 2, it's all there. So let me get into the Voter Bill of Rights itself. And I'm going to go one by one and pretty quickly. And if there are questions about some of these, you can ask them and we'll respond to them after the presentations. So the first one is this, the right to vote if you're a registered voter. Everybody has these following rights. And you are eligible to vote if you're a citizen living in California, you're 18 years old, you're registered in California, and where you live. You're not currently serving a state or federal prison term for the conviction of a felony, and not currently found mentally incompetent to vote by a court. If you meet all those criteria, you can become a registered voter and vote. That's the first one. Number two, the right to vote if you're a registered voter, even if your name is not on the list. So if you go to a polling place and they tell you they cannot find your name on the list, you have the right to vote a provisional ballot. And it'll be counted once the election officials determine that you are eligible to vote in that jurisdiction. Number three, the right to vote if you are still in line when the polls close. In California, polls close at 8 p.m. And if you are in line, you have the right to stay in that line and vote until you vote. It doesn't matter if it's 8:05 by the time you get to your voting machine or system, or 10 o'clock at night. We hope it's not 10 p.m., but you have the right to stay there and vote. Doesn't matter that it's past 8 p.m., but you must be in line already. Number four, the right to cast a secret ballot without anyone bothering you or telling you how to vote. So this is pretty critical. You don't want poll workers telling you how to vote. You don't want people who are electioneering in and around a polling place to tell you how to vote. So you have the right to cast your ballot and keep that who you voted for secret. It's in the Constitution. Number five, the right to get a new ballot if you've made a mistake and if you have not already cast your ballot. So here, what can you do if you're at the polling place? You can ask an election official at the polling place for a new ballot. And if it's a vote by mail ballot, you can exchange your vote by mail ballot for a new one at an elections office or a polling place. And you can vote using a provisional ballot. So if you're not sure and they say you've already voted, you're not sure if that was you or not, you have to swear that you haven't voted before on the provisional ballot application or ballot you receive, and you can cast a provisional ballot. Provisional ballots are fail-safe ballots. They're designed in those situations where you may have made a mistake or you haven't received one. We'll get into that a little bit later. Number six, the right to get help casting your ballot. So under state law, you can have anyone you choose assist you in casting your ballot, interpreting anything, understanding what you need to do to cast your ballot, but you cannot use your employer or union rep. Those are the prohibitions on who can help you. So you can have somebody doesn't matter if they're over 18 or under 18. And many of us know and have come from families where we've had to help translate for parents or grandparents, and that's fine under the law. Number seven, the right to drop off your completed vote by mail ballot at any polling place in California. So if you find yourself in a different county, well, we prefer that you drop it off in your county. You can still drop it off at any election office or polling location, and they will make sure that it gets to us. It gets to the right county, I'm sure. I'm sorry, and in time to be counted. So that's number seven. Number eight is the right to get election materials in a language other than English, if enough people in your voting precinct speak that language. And so state and federal law have certain requirements for when election materials get translated. And if your particular jurisdiction, precinct, county has the sufficient number of people in that precinct or jurisdiction to trigger coverage for a particular language, you have the right to get that. Many times you'll see that question asked on voter registration materials. You can also call your election office and determine how you can make some changes to ensure that you get translated election materials to you as well. Many jurisdictions will have their actual ballots on the voting machines also translated if you're in one of these covered jurisdictions. So that's number eight. Number nine, the right to ask questions to election officials about election procedure and to watch processes. So this is an important process So there are a lot of rights to observe, preserved in election code and regulations that preserve the right of folks. Many of them are your own organizations to observe the process from start to finish. And if you have questions and they can't answer them, they can find a person to answer those questions for you. Doesn't mean you can be disruptive, or anybody can be disruptive to the process. And if so, they can stop answering. Number 10, the right to report any illegal or fraudulent election activity to an election official or the Secretary of State's office. And I'm going to get into a little bit of this in just a second, but this is an important one. If you witness anything that you think is improper, illegal, or fraudulent, you have the right to report it. And we have a process for that, which I'll get into just in 1 second here. So how do we report issues to the Secretary of State? And this is going to be important that you utilize, take a picture of this, or this information will be shared with you after the presentation today or the session today. This going online and finding one of these methods, or by phone or by email, submitting your election will ensure it gets to the right place. That's critical in an election where time matters. So oops, 1 second here. So one of the things also when you do report issues to the Secretary of State's office is understanding what to share with us. And it's very important that when you do, or your constituents that you share this information with, report something, that it's a complete report. We want to make sure we have all the details to make sure we can follow up with whomever is involved to find out exactly what is happening, what has happened, to verify that it's happened, and to take steps to resolve the issues quickly. So it's really a lot of the basic stuff if your organizations are running hotlines or reaching out to, working with various communities in preparation for the election, and you hear about stuff, the more detail you have, the better it will be for us. So all the who, what, where, when, etc., all the things you're familiar with will help us find out exactly. So your name, phone number, contact information, what organization you're with, so we can follow up with you all. What exactly are you reporting? Are you reporting intimidation, no signage, block signage, perhaps a disturbance at a polling place, a fight, electioneering? All of this stuff is you can report to our office. Chances are it may have been already reported and resolved by the time you get to one of these pages, but it's okay. We'd rather have duplicative reports than no report. Also, of course, when exactly did this happen, where it happened. And this last little piece here on the where piece is important. The address and precinct, if appropriate. That helps us narrow in exactly where this activity is happening and allows us to deploy folks who may be in the area to observe as well. Understanding if you've reported it to anyone else is going to be helpful as well. So have you let the registrar know? Has the polling place workers, election workers, have they already said that they've already called it into their troubleshooter? Let us know anyways. Sometimes there's witnesses, and if you have any names of witnesses, their cell phone numbers, etc., provide that as well. All of this will help get issues resolved quickly. And we do get a lot of reports from organizations, and it's super critical because you are often the eyes and ears for us on the ground. We have some observers that go out. There will be other observers from lots of communities as well. And so we always encourage them to follow this type of format when they call us. Sending an email to me or to Jana will not make it the smoothest way to get issues resolved. When you call into one of those areas, the hotline or to the online complaint, that makes sure it gets in our system and gets assigned and resolved. The last thing I'll just mention here, just in case, on our website, this is the first page of our website at sos.ca.gov. There's translated information. So all the basic information folks need to know about how to cast their vote, where to find polling locations, etc. There's translated information there in that little area right there. Let me turn it over to Jana, see if she has anything to supplement from what I have had this to mention. I know there's a few questions that we might get into towards the end, but Jana?
Just one thing I'd like to bring up is that the Voter Bill of Rights is also posted at every voting location. So you'll see them there if you go on election day or early voting. There is a poster with that same information.
Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. At this moment, we're gonna go ahead and invite our panelists over. My name is Laura Tinajero, and I'll be moderating today's panel. And so, like I mentioned, we're gonna go ahead and invite today's panelists, community leaders on voting rights, to please introduce themselves and their respective organizations. And we're gonna go ahead and get started with Jonathan.
Hi, folks. My name is Jonathan Methestein. I'm the Executive Director at California Common Cause.
Well, over to Dora.
Hi, everybody. Dora Rose. I'm Deputy Director with the League of Women Voters of California, she, her pronouns, and delighted to be here today.
Great.
Everyone, my name is Timmy Liu. I'm the Executive Director of Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders for Civic Empowerment Education Fund, and I use he, him pronouns.
Hi, everybody. Norberto Gonzalez with Poder Latinx, and I use he, him, el pronouns.
Morning, everybody. My name is Jonna Morehouse. I'm with the California Black Power Network, and I use she or any pronouns.
Thank you. Thank you again for joining us today. And starting the panel off today, once again, is Jonathan. Jonathan, something unique about Common Cause California is that it runs election protection programs in California. What is the significance of these programs, and how do they help California voters?
Thank you for the question, and thank you to the Attorney General's office and the CARE team for putting this on and inviting us to share about what we do. First and foremost, who are we? California Common Cause is a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization that tries to protect and expand democracy. We work on voting rights, redistricting reform, money and politics reform, and other democracy issues. But today, I want to answer your question about election protection. So, for over a decade, California Common Cause has led the election protection program in Southern California. What that means is that in every election cycle, we deploy trained volunteer poll monitors to voting sites on election day and in the early voting period immediately before election day. The goal is to resolve problems and to serve voters, regardless of their party. We make really clear to volunteers that every vote is sacred, that they are to help every eligible person cast their ballot, regardless of which candidates that voter might be casting their ballot for. This year, for the November 2024 election, our goal is to have 300 volunteers inspecting voting sites in 8 Southern California counties. Okay, so that's the introduction. Let's talk about it in a little greater detail. So California Common Cause will be sending volunteers this year to voting sites in 8 counties: LA, Orange, San Diego, Riverside, San Bernardino, Kings, Tulare, and Kern. And just FYI, if the folks out there are interested in volunteering with us or know people who might be interested, we're really prioritizing volunteer recruitment here at the last stages in the Inland Empire and the Central Valley. So Riverside, San Bernardino, Kings, Tulare, and Kern. Once a volunteer signs up with us, they're provided an extensive training. They're given a variety of supplementary materials to read, many of which are customized to the county that they're poll monitoring in. They also get a hat and a t-shirt identifying them as an election protection volunteer, and paper checklists for every voting site they're going to be in. Once they arrive at a voting site, they are instructed to introduce themselves to the lead poll worker and explain their role. They are instructed to stay out of the way, to always be polite, and to never obstruct voting or the work of poll workers. We're really, really clear about what our volunteers can and can't do in a voting site, and we want to always be respectful of voters and poll workers. Our poll monitors fill out a checklist evaluating each voting site on wait times, language and disability access, parking, poll worker effectiveness, and so on. They inspect the voting site for compliance with state and federal voting rights laws. They make sure voters with disabilities can access the site. They make sure that required translated materials are available. They check for available parking, good signage, functioning voting machines. They make sure same-day voter registration and provisional ballots are being offered as appropriate, and so on. And after having filled out their checklist, they just watch the voting process for a while. They support voters if they encounter problems, and they make sure that voters are aware of their rights. If a problem emerges that our volunteers can't handle, they call our headquarters based in LA, and we help them troubleshoot or escalate it to the proper authorities. And then after Election Day, we catalog all the data from the volunteers' checklists and hundreds of voting sites, and we evaluate how counties performed. This year, we would expect to send each of our 8 counties feedback in probably early 2025. This form of oversight in partnership with the county elections offices, who, by the way, we meet with in advance, know we're going to be coming, have the details of our program. This partnership and oversight has led to small but concrete and meaningful improvements in election administration in the past. So, like I said, if you're interested in the program, we urge you to, particularly in Riverside, San Bernardino, Kings, Tulare, and Kern, we urge you to check us out at protectthevote.net. And if you have any questions, you can email us at cacommoncause@gmail.com. I'll put both of those in the chat once I'm done. And if you're in Northern California, and that means the Bay Area, Sacramento, the Central Valley, from Fresno on up, we urge you to contact Asian Law Caucus, our partners. They run a very similar election protection program with the same values and the same approach we do in the Northern California region. And you can contact them at pollmonitor@asianlawcaucus.org. And I'll put that information in the chat as well. And before I go, I want to mention one last additional opportunity that's better suited for folks who want to volunteer on their own time and from home. We also recruit volunteers to serve as online disinformation monitors. These digital monitors take a wide range of actions. They identify and report election misinformation, disinformation online, and they share inoculation content. They fight fake news with real news. And if you're interested in that opportunity, I'll put a link in the chat as well. So thank you so much for your time. Again, I'll put all the relevant links in the chat for how you can get involved. And thank you again to the Attorney General's office for this opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing today and for the work that you and Common Cause California are doing to support California voters. And next, we're going to move on to Dora. Hey, Dora, it's great to have you here today representing the League of Women Voters of California. I know you do have some slides you're going to share with us. And with that, will you please share with us how the League of Women Voters is working to protect and expand voting rights to ensure everyone is represented in our democracy?
Absolutely. And you can throw up the first slide as I get started here. Thank you, Trini. And I want to just plug Common Cause's Observer Program. It's terrific. Doing that or being a poll worker at your vote center or local polling places are probably two of the most impactful things that you can do on Election Day. So the League of Women Voters of California is a nonpartisan organization, right? Our main goals on the education side are to encourage informed and active participation in government, to increase people's understanding of major public policy issues, the sorts of issues that we're all facing, right? And to meet those goals, we and our local leagues across the state, we have over 60 local leagues across the state, do education and outreach. We produce materials that are in plain language so that everyone can understand both what their rights are and also what's on the ballot. We produce them in multiple languages to help make sure that everyone can be engaged and that California's voters reflect its rich diversity. And we try to cut through the noise for voters. There's a lot of noise in the election, right? And connect them directly with their candidates. We do that through our online ballot lookup tool, Vote 411. And I'll talk about that in a little bit more detail in a moment, so folks can more easily understand what their candidates really stand for. Because making sure that people are comfortable with the process and that they've got the information that they need is really, it's just essential to engaging them, to building equal representation, and to eventually having a government that serves everyone. All of our voting resources can be found on the cavotes.org website that you see the front page of here. So I'm going to, in the next few slides, go over a few of our key resources that incorporate the state resources, some of which you've heard about already. And so if you can go to slide 2, please. Thank you. So cavotes.org includes the California Voter Bill of Rights from the Secretary of State's office. I'm not going to go into this in great detail because you heard from Steve already. But the Voter Bill of Rights was actually rewritten in a joint project between the Secretary of State's office and the League of Women Voters of California in 2016. And the purpose of that rewrite was to make its content more clear and more accessible to voters. Slide 3, please. So you're going to hear more about this from Norberto in a moment. I'm not going to get into it in too much detail, but among the new resources that the Secretary of State provides, and this is directly from the Secretary of State's office, is a clear and important explanation in multiple languages key, right, of the rights of people to vote who have prior felony convictions. It makes really clear that the only time that people with criminal convictions are not permitted to vote is if they are currently serving a state or a federal prison sentence. That's very important. People on parole or probation, they now have the right to vote. They just need to register when they're released from incarceration. And people in county jails, they retain the right to vote unless they are in the very, very unusual situation of serving a state prison sentence in a jail. Very rare. So let me be clear, you always retain the right to vote with misdemeanor convictions, and of course, if you're being held pre-trial. Next slide, please. So this is a side-by-side explanation of the two guides that voters will receive in the mail. It was developed jointly by the League of Women Voters, the Center for Civic Design, and the Secretary of State's office in a project that we embarked upon together to make the guides clearer and more accessible to voters. We created it once we realized that voters were really confused about why they were getting two guides. So it explains that one is from the state with state candidates and ballot measure information, and the other is from the county with local candidates and ballot measures. And if you can't find it in your state voter guide, sometimes it's published in there. It is available online at the Secretary of State's site and at cavotes.org. Slide 5, please. So the Easy Voter Guide is an online and paper publication with really clear, easy explanation of registering, of voting, and of what to expect in the election. It's designed for new and busy voters, and it delivers really clear, nonpartisan, plain language summaries of statewide ballot measures. The guide is community reviewed with people who have low literacy, so we can make sure that everyone will understand the explanations. And it's available in 5 languages. It's in English, it's in Spanish, Chinese, Vietnamese, and Korean. Next slide, please. These are just a few examples of the Easy Voter Guide pages and the information they provide. We explain things like where your representative, what your representatives in government do. We write up these short, clear proposition summaries and the pros and cons of each one. And then we also explain the mechanics of how to cast a ballot that you know will be counted. And various other sort of essential voting information. And again, this can be found at easyvoterguide.org. And I'll drop those links in the chat too. Slide 7, please. We also created pros and cons in English or Spanish for a deeper dive into the state ballot measures and the arguments for and against each measure. Slide 8, please. So vote411.org is the League of Women Voters online voting information guide. And what it does is to provide voters with polling locations and personalized ballots that actually contain unbiased plain language information about both candidates and ballot measures. So the candidate information here is coming directly from them through the questions that we ask. And the idea behind Vote 411 is to make sure that voters have access to the information they need to make choices that line up with their values and interests. So again, we try to cut through all that election noise and connect voters directly with candidates so that they can get the information they need to feel comfortable exercising their right to vote. And I think that's it for me.
Thank you. That was very informative, Dora. Thank you and the League of Women Voters of California for all of your hard work. And next we're going to move on to Timmy. Hey, Timmy, can you please share with us what strategies and resources AAPI Force EF utilizes to reach Asian and Pacific Islander communities?
Yeah, happy to answer this question. And, I think it may help to start to just share some information to understand my community a little bit more. And so AAPI refers to Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders in California. And what my organization does, AAPI Force Education Fund, is conducts voter outreach work in nearly a dozen Asian and Pacific Islander languages. Right? And we work with local community-based organizations across the state, working in different communities and geographies to do that work. And this is important because 1/3 of all Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders in the US live in California, and 17% of the California electorate is Asian American or Pacific Islander. We're a fast-growing community, and since 2020, there's been a 10% increase in AAPI voters in the state. And so one of the things that we found from our work is that we have a large number of voters who prefer to speak a language other than English, or will consume voting information in both English and their native language. And so recently we conducted a poll of Asian American voters. We called this poll the Asian American Voter Insights Survey. And what we found in this survey was that 1 in 5 voters consume political news in a language other than English in our community. And what that tells us is that the work that we're doing in doing outreach and communicating with voters, their rights in languages other than English, using sort of community advocates is a really important part of our work. And so what do? I think similar to the work of Common Cause and League of Women Voters is that we do spend a lot of time with our community members talking about the voting process and talking to them about the role of different offices and explaining the myriad ballot measures that California voters have to make decisions on. And so while my organization is statewide and we focus on state measures, we also have local partners who work at the city and county level to help educate their community members around what are some of the issues that they are that they need to make some choices around, right? We know that this work takes year-round outreach, right? And so that's why we partner with community-based organizations that talk and engage with community members to get them involved in government. We work with families and young people, knowing that young people often serve, as others have mentioned before, often serves as translators and interpreters for their elders also. And we also work with elders in our community, knowing that in a lot of Asian American and Pacific Islander communities, community elders play a significant role in advising and supporting community members and encouraging for them to turn out to vote. And in this sense, we really try to consider the community as an asset and not a deficit, right? That we see that knowing that our community speaks languages other than English, we know that that's an opportunity for us to deliver the information that our communities need to make important decisions, right? And so I think a big part of our work is making sure that people know that they can access ballot materials in language. And so that's working with our city and county level partners so that they can communicate to community members that in their jurisdictions, they may be able to request bilingual ballots or other materials in their language. Making sure that they know that they can get help if they need it, right? That they can bring in family members, friends, trusted people to the polling booth or to help them vote by mail if that's support that they need, right? And then we also understand that despite the protections offered by the state, that there are going to be gaps. We know that this is a fast-growing community, and because it's a fast-growing community, that it is the supports offered doesn't always reflect the immediate need, right? And so that's why we work with a range of community-based organizations, health clinics, and others working in our community to get the information out, right? And as I said, we rely on trusted messengers, people who are organizers and advocates in their own community. And our recent polling found why this is important. We found that 46% of our community members say that they don't get any contact at all from any political party, right? And we see this as because it is hard to do outreach in Asian and Pacific Islander languages, right? And oftentimes we find that our community members are not considered frequent or likely voters, right? And so campaigns that have to make choices around resources may not invest in our communities because they do not believe our communities are voters, right? But what we know is from our work that talking to voters one-on-one is our most effective tool, right? And we're also training community members to serve as resources for voting in their own families, right? And so those are the two methodologies that we deploy to help get our communities out to vote. And the materials that we develop and share try to complement what the state and county registrars offer. And we have a lot of growth in our communities, and our objective is really to fill in some of these gaps and in communication and make sure that our communities are participating in voting and the civic processes. So that's all I had to share.
Thank you, Timmy and AAPI Force EF for sharing such valuable resources in the community. We're going to move over to Norberto. Hi, Norberto. Norberto, we know that Poder Latinx is doing work to register citizens in the community. Can you please tell us what your experience has been working with students and formerly incarcerated Latino community members?
Yeah, thanks, Laura. Again, I want to say thank you so much for putting this together. And I feel like I'm going to give the anecdotal piece because we've already listened to a lot of the technicalities, and we use a lot of the same resources at Poder Latinx. But let me take a quick step backwards and say who Poder is first. So Poder Latinx is a nonprofit civic engagement organization focused in the Central Valley from Fresno County down to Kern County. And we have a goal of civically supporting our community to create a voting block of Latino voters that won't necessarily just vote, but also become part of our community, because we still need a lot of them to be in those election seats that we're still missing, having those Latino faces. So that's our goal, right? And part of what we do is focus on those individuals that can pre-register to vote. In California at 16 years old, we have that opportunity. So we've partnered with a couple of schools, some counties, where we come and do presentations, not just about the right to register to vote, but what voting rights look like from the origin of our nation and how things have changed. We do our works with some of the information League of Women Voters has, some of their videos, and also Secretary of State's videos. And then at the end, we pre-register the students, and we also run mock elections. So that's a fun and engaging way to get students to participate. And we do like vote for your favorite fruit. So it's kind of cool to be able to showcase which fruit wins. And I'll tell you hands down, at every place that we've done it, Apple always tends to win. I don't know why, but people really like apples apparently. So that's kind of cool. Outside of that, we work a lot with the professors to keep that momentum going and give those students that leadership and that opportunity to grow. So we give them those opportunities of volunteer partnership to help us in the rest of the community. One of the obstacles that we did find in the area is that we were noticing a lot of conversations around the individuals that were formerly incarcerated. So we worked side by side with one of the chief probation officer's office in one of our counties to update and continuously update every single probation officer that they have on staff and the materials that they had when they were meeting with those individuals, whether that was the Bill of Rights that Secretary of State's website hosts, or the actual tool that the Secretary of State's website has, where you can type in the information of where you are at, and it gives you a readout if you have the opportunity to vote in this election. So super useful tools that are easily accessible and are trusted resources that are coming from the Secretary of State's website for every individual to be able to use. Outside of that, we also were able to partner with a local county elections office that does work with some of the county jails and being able to bridge that gap whenever they had a hole, if whether it was translation or time. That's where we come in and we support the role that they already have been filling. And all that to say, to be able to really get the Latino vote to come out and support, because we know that Latinos tend not to vote at the same parity as some of our other community members. And with that, I will close.
Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing with us ways in which Poder Latinx is engaging students and formerly incarcerated individuals in the Latinx community. And next, I'd like to turn our attention to Jana of California Black Power Network. And I know you have some slides. And with that, I did want to ask if you could share with us about the civic engagement work that you all are doing and what voter resources you have to offer.
Yes, definitely. And if we can, okay, perfect. Thank you. Yeah, and just thank you so much for having us. Thank you, Laura and the CARE team for hosting this and getting all of this really important info out to the communities. So yeah, just briefly about kind of who we are, the California Black Power Network. We are a network and ecosystem of over 40 Black-led and Black-serving organizations across the state. And, democracy is like one of our guiding issues. And we especially focus on like hard to reach voters, like Black immigrants, the unhoused community, as well as like formerly and currently incarcerated folks. And yeah, these are some of the communities that can either be like hard to reach or hard to count. And, we really want to ensure that these voices are not being left out of decision-making processes. So we can go to the next slide. One back. There we go. Thank you. And so in just talking about making sure that all voices are heard. Just a quick note on Prop 17, we already heard, some about that, but again, restored the right to vote for people who are currently on parole for felony convictions. And so that's info, that we want to make sure folks are aware of, as well as the fact that in California, you don't need an address or an ID to vote. You can use an intersection instead of an address, and you can also use your social security number if you don't have an ID. And so again, just like, putting some of this info out there to some of these harder to reach communities. And we can go to the next slide. And so within our network, we kind of have 7 main like issue areas, which we decided in collaboration with our statewide network of partners, and those are housing, education, healthcare, real safety, healthy built environment, and democracy, of course, which is one of the reasons we're participating in this today. And then the final one being economic opportunity. And so we can go to the next slide. And so within the network, within Black Power Network, one of the central kind of focus is like the organizing power of the Black grassroots organizations, leaders, as well as residents. And we have several kind of different venues, different ways that we do this, multiple ways. And so we do this through policy development and advocacy. We also do this through civic engagement and organizing. And so within this area of civic engagement, we strongly utilize IVE, or integrated voter engagement. And so really that just means, that we're engaging voters beyond and outside of election years to make sure that folks are staying involved. Especially we want to, make sure people from marginalized communities are counted, considered, that they're informed, and that they're also helping to structure policy decisions. And so with, integrated voter engagement, that's really been a key strategy in building, Black organizing and grassroots political power. And then also importantly, we do, like Timmy was sharing before, we also, utilize and work with trusted messengers and, within community leaders, because we've seen over and over again, the success that brings. And then also narrative and culture work, as well as protest and direct action. And so, we know this is a major election year. There's a lot at stake. And so it's important to get, this factual and accurate information out to our voters, and especially our marginalized communities. And we could go to the final slide. And so on our website, we have the Voting 101 that has all sorts of important dates, timelines, eligibility reminders. You can also sign up to join, the movement with us, or if you have questions about our work. And then, and we do also recommend folks to use the Secretary of State's voter information guide, as well as the Where's My Ballot function, which is a really easy way to track your ballot after your vote has been cast. So thank you so much. That wraps it up for me.
Thank you, Jana, for your informative presentation on California Black Power Network, and for all the work that you're doing to engage California voters. And I want to again thank all of our panelists and their organizations for providing such valuable information and working hard to educate and protect all California voters. I would now like to pass it over to Mahin, who will be facilitating the Q&A portion of this briefing.
Thank you so much, Laura. Now I'd like to invite all of our panelists who are still here to stay on screen, and the other speakers that we've had from the presentations to join us on screen for the Q&A portion of today's presentation. So as a reminder, you can ask a question using the Q&A box on the bottom of your screen. And there are a couple questions that have been submitted already. Some have been answered. And if you submitted a question with your registration form ahead of time, thank you so much for doing so. And just a reminder, if you are affiliated with the press, you can direct your questions to AG Press Office at doj.ca.gov. So to start us off, there's a question here, and I'll direct this. Let's see if I can direct this to you, Steve, from SOS first. So is there anything that can be done either at the state or federal level about PACs, which are sending mailers and damaging innocent people, supporting candidates who might be underage, things like that? Anything that can be done about PACs?
So generally, so our office, I'll just start by this. Our office is a filing entity for campaign finance reporting requirements, expenditures and contribution reports, etc. And there's the Fair Political Practices Commission is the entity that is responsible for enforcing some of the requirements for disclosures, etc. under the government code. And so to the extent there are concerns that you have, and without saying what exactly the question was talking about, that material reference to referral over to the FPPC enforcement entity would be the appropriate place for that. So without saying more, I think that's the best place for that sort of potential issue. So that's for state candidates and state sort of political action committee types of mailers, etc. The Federal Election Commission handles all those related to federal candidates.
Thank you so much for that, Steve. Another question that we had, if I just moved to my current city but haven't registered with the DMV, can I still vote in my city's local election? It's open to anybody who would like to respond.
I can respond to that. Yes, absolutely. So there's online registration that's available on the Secretary of State's webpage, and we can put it in the chat, the link to it. And of course, DMV is one option, but there's many, many other options. You can do it by mail. You can do it on our website. You can actually go into a county elections official's office and do it there. And there is a registration deadline 15 days before the election. However, after that, you can go in person to do same-day registration. That will have to be done in person, not by mail or online.
Great, thanks so much, Anna. Here's a good question. I think anybody, any of our nonprofit organization leaders, if you would be willing to answer this question. So someone said, it's very difficult to motivate people to go and vote. Are there any tips and tricks one can suggest?
I can take that. I think the most important tip or trick is to work with community-based organizations that can provide culturally competent outreach. I think folks are most interested in hearing from people who have shared lived experiences. So working through community-based organizations to do that outreach, and then resourcing. Those folks need resources, those community-based organizations, to do that culturally competent outreach is the most effective way of engaging voters, and not shying away from the questions that they ask, tying the act of voting to what's important in their lives, being able to explain to folks how it impacts them in a very at a very fundamental level and touches their lives in a very fundamental level is important. But again, the best messengers for that are folks from communities that are similar to the communities that you're reaching out to.
Can I add on to that?
Go ahead.
I think also it's important to understand that folks and persons who may not be engaged with voting may not understand always how to vote, the mechanics of voting, what this voter information guide is, it's pretty intimidating sometimes, it's sometimes 100, 150 pages long. not knowing exactly how to vote on a voting system or how to register to vote and not wanting to get in trouble. And so I think a lot of these basic mechanical questions can help people get more comfortable with how to vote and how to participate. And if they have folks to answer the questions, like Dora was mentioning, for the unique situations they may find themselves in, whether they're homeless or couch surfing or, how to register, these are very sort of technical questions sometimes for how to deal with these very real situations that people find themselves in terms of trying to get, participate in our electoral process.
Yeah, I'll add something to that as well. Just that also, I think it's really important to tap in with, like within certain communities, tapping in with the people who are already established community leaders within those communities. So, and if it's a given neighborhood or a certain area or whatever, there's going to be maybe elders or, just folks that are very known already within those communities as being leaders for, events or just, bonding or whatever, holding those threads together. And so tapping in and bringing those folks into the conversation is really important as well, I'd say.
I appreciate all of that. Thank you. Another question in similar vein. What challenges have you come across when encouraging communities to vote that have been historically slighted by election results? Open to anybody.
I can jump in here and just kind of build on what Jana had mentioned also is in the community that I work in, there's a lot of skepticism that your vote will be counted. A lot of our immigrant and refugee communities come from chaotic political home situations or situations where participating in politics was not something that you did, right? And so I think understanding that that can be a challenging starting point when you're having a conversation about engaging in voters. That sort of a simple tactics like shaming people or talking to them about like their democracy itself like might not be as effective, right? As I think Steve and others had mentioned around like, let's break down the mechanics of the thing, right? But I think in addition to breaking down the mechanics of like how to vote, it's also breaking the mechanics of like why to vote, right? That like your choices on ballot measures and candidates and other things like can have a really big impact on your daily life. And so I think that's a big part of the work of my organizations and many other community organizations on this call too, is communicating that sort of clarity around what the impacts and consequences could be, and that there is an important opportunity here to express a position around these issues.
Thank you, Timmy. A question, there are a couple questions here. We might have touched on them, but it's good to just rehash them during the Q&A. There's a question here regarding voting rights for people who are incarcerated. Are there voting rights for people who are incarcerated? How does it get implemented?
I'm pausing to see if Norberto wants to pick that one up. But I think I went through it in a rather great degree of detail in my presentation. Yes, if you're incarcerated in a jail, you certainly do have voting rights. And we need to do a good job of getting that message out. And folks who are now released from incarceration in prison and on probation or parole immediately have their voting rights restored. They just need to register to vote.
Appreciate that, Dora. Thank you. Another question here. Do all your organizations often collaborate on these efforts to foster unity in election education and voters' confidence during election season? Would love to hear from maybe anybody on the panel who might want to speak to what other types of collaborations your organizations might do. We're hoping that this is one of those resources that show the collaboration between nonprofits and state agencies. I'd love to hear if there's any other efforts taking place.
I don't mind taking that one. Yeah, we do a ton of collaborating. We'd like to share resources on the D3 side to make sure that, we're not talking to the same people multiple times with different faces and saying different messages. So we do some coordinated events. For us specifically at Poder Latinx, we do culturally significant events in the community, and we invite a lot of our partners in the area, and we try to grow our network to make sure that, you know, we're reaching everybody, not just one segment of the population, and that there's different avenues that if maybe they don't like my message, they like my partner organization's message a little bit better. That's cool. The point is for us to get those people to go out to vote, register and go out to vote.
And Maheen, can I take a second swing at that? I would add that all of our groups know that democracy is year-round, and that we don't need to just pay attention to the health of our democracy during election season once every 2 years. So all of our organizations collaborate on other ways we can improve, expand, and protect our democracy. So we work on money in politics reform to find campaign finance systems that lift up the voices of regular people. We collaborate on redistricting reforms that can end gerrymandering. We collaborate on all sorts of stuff in order to build a democracy in that period where we're not all focused on election madness. There's actually downtime to improve the structure of our democracy, the systems of our democratic institutions, so that when it comes time for elections, we get outcomes that are more representative and governments that are more responsive to regular community.
I love that. That's super important. Thank you so much for sharing, Jonathan. Another question here, maybe Damon or Steve, Jaina, you can take this. Are there laws against ghost candidacies?
Not sure what you're referring to, or maybe others are.
If the person here would like to expand on your question so that we can get more insight and answer it, I would appreciate that. We'll hold on that and come back if there's more information available. Another question about citizenship. Is there any reliable voter ID needed? Citizens, non-citizens voting. If we can just expand on that, I think we did a little earlier, just touch on that topic again on what is any relationship between citizenship and voting.
I'll just take a stab at this one. So there's two things, right, for the state and federal elections that we have in California. There's specific requirements for, as I mentioned at the outset of the Voter Bill of Rights, for persons to be U.S. citizens. Some jurisdictions have implemented, local jurisdictions in their own local elections, so just those elections have allowed non-citizens to vote. But in terms of IDs and if that was part of the question, I think state law requires only for the state and federal elections that a person to attest to their citizenship. That is sufficient in California for meeting that requirement. So right now, that's what California does, and that's what we've done for quite a while. For other types of elections, those will be handled by the local jurisdictions. I know there's a few out there that are experimenting with these types of local elections where parents in school districts who are not citizens can vote, but that's a separate process from the state process. And so we don't mix those types of voter registration databases. We want to make sure we protect, folks who are non-citizens from any law enforcement sort of impacts that might otherwise occur if we had shared information.
Yeah.
Can I add a few thoughts to Steve's answer? I think it's just really important to underscore that California's elections have managed to find a way to be inclusive and participatory and totally secure at the same time. I think there's a false narrative in our national politics that elections can only be one or the other. And if we take active steps to bring new people into our democracy, that what that means is we're compromising the integrity of our elections and our vote results. And that's totally false. California has actually modeled for the rest of the country what it looks like to make voting and voter registration easier while maintaining election security. So when you register to vote, you have to provide your driver's license number, your state ID number, your social security number. That enables the registrar of voters in your local community to check your identity against the DMV or the Social Security Administration to confirm that you are in fact a US citizen before you can cast your ballot. And those county elections offices are continuously doing voter registration list maintenance to make sure that they have accurate, up-to-date voter registration lists to make sure that people who are eligible to vote are the ones who are able to cast a ballot. There is no, again, I know that there are narratives at the national level. There is no documented evidence of any meaningful amount of non-citizen voting in or ineligible individuals voting in California elections. We have done a really, really impressive job, actually, of ensuring election security while making our systems as open and participatory as possible.
Appreciate that for clarifying and laying it out. Thank you. We got a little bit more information on the ghost candidacy question. Maybe this can help us answer it. So what they mean is candidates who don't really exist but get on the ballot. It's happened in the past, wanting to get more information on if there's any laws about that.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with the details of that, and it seems like a pretty specific question, so we can look into that.
Yeah, maybe if the individual who's asked this question would like to email us, our contact information will be available after, and we would be happy to dig into that a little bit more to answer. I think that about wraps up the questions that we have. Thank you all so much. I'll pass it back to Kat.
Thank you all so much for being a part of our community briefing today, Know Your Voting Rights. And thank you all for who are watching today. We hope that this presentation was informative and useful to you. Please keep in contact with us. You can always reach our office by emailing care@doj.ca.gov. And that goes for if you think of more questions you'd like to ask about voting, please go ahead and email that email address. The resources and links mentioned in today's presentation are available on our website now. It's oag.ca.gov/community-briefings. And the recording of this presentation will also be available there shortly. We'll also email this out to everyone who registered for this event today. In addition, we'd like to invite you all to join us at our next Demystifying the DOJ, which will feature our Office of CARE, the Office of Community Awareness, Response, and Engagement. And that is taking place on December 11th from 10 to 11. You may register for this event at oag.ca.gov/care/demystifying-the-DOJ. Thank you all for joining us today. Have a great day and stay safe.